Now, this is a little bit different today. This call is a bit different. So at the back end of it, we're going to have a bit of a chat, bit of a peer-to-peer discussion, and this is how some of the community calls will be moving forward now with a little bit more of a supervision style interaction, because I think that's a valuable approach, which will ultimately, ensure that we are working on building and developing our coaching practice. So today's topic, which we're going to go through, is on creativity and innovation. I think it's a bit of a unsung hero of coaching and how it actually moves the needle forward for the clients, obviously, as our focus, but also for us as coaches as well, being able to have and be creative and innovative in our businesses, in our ways we're delivering coaching, and how we are existing within also our personal lives as well. If things are, can sometimes be on top of us a little bit, how are we actually moving forward in that? Which, as coaches, it's a very personal and a very professional intertwined experience. So it's important to be able to look after our own creativity as coaches and then take that into our practice and support our clients to become creative and innovative as well. So I just want to ask you a few questions at the beginning of this, which we will come back round to at the end, which is, where has creativity and innovation been important for you? If you do have the ability to write a few notes, write a few these questions down, write a few notes, then please do so. And you might come up with some ideas along the way as we're talking through some of the areas. And second question, how can it be affected positively or negatively? And a third question is, have you seen the impact of lower levels of creativity? So a reflection that you might have if you're a coach is to look back on where some of those areas of creativity have been impeded and what's been the impact of those. And then just a little thought on how do we protect our creativity in coaching for us and our clients. Some of these questions you might find the answers to as we move through the presentation. So coaching, creativity and innovation, through this lens, we're going to explore the emotional mastery aspect of it as well, the cognitive flexibility of it. And we're just going to lean into a little bit, but not too much, around the neurobiology and that kind of breakthrough thinking that is required in order to move people along their coaching journey. And often we might find that clients have an abundance of information, and they might be fixed on one or looking at a certain strategy in a certain way. And actually, the reason they're struggling is not because of lack of information, but they can't see other options. They can't see different perspectives. They can't envisage how they would potentially use tools that they have at their disposal in the way that they need to in order to be able to have some level of success within the coaching experience. At this point, it's important for us to just have a little bit of a definition on what creativity is in coaching. Obviously, when we think about creativity, there might be an aspect of the traditional view where you see an artist, a musician, or these kind of different uh, creative outlets. An epiphany, when something becomes clear, or someone has just an innate ability to be creative. In sport, sometimes you might find that individual that has the capability of finding that pass amongst the chaos of people, and they're all that creative flair of how to score a goal or a try or what have you. So, this has a tendency to fix people in being either creative or not. So instead of having this idea of it being fixed, it's like, well, actually, that is one perspective, the traditional perspective, that someone would be potentially deemed as creative or not. But if we zoomed out and we looked at all the other areas where people can be creative, so if we have a coaching application, focus is obviously over behavioral, emotional, relational, practical capabilities and adaptability. So how do we find creativity in coaching? Well, it would be the idea of new ways in order to be able to become aware or regulate, new ways to communicate, ways in which you can potentially build like resilience. Previous call that we had was a lot about like how and ways in which people can build resilience. So there is that creativity of how do we have a positive effect on some of those traits within coaching, setbacks, and how do we find that reconnection with the individual in order for them to be able to have a distinct level of motivation or movement forward because they're tied more to their identity. So there's a lot of ways in which you can see creativity within a coaching context, which comes away from the actual traditional view. That's not to say that you can't have a positive impact across the two ways. You might have someone who is using some sort of traditional view of creativity to help them within coaching and vice versa. So just having a think around the way in which coaching creativity is perceived. Now, from a neurobiological perspective, the anatomy of becoming stuck when faced with a problem, and this over the years, the problems have arisen in all sorts of different areas that I've coached, but the idea of being stuck and rigid and having a narrowed perspective does reveal itself in quite a distinct way. When a problem is put in front of someone, they can see no way around it, and they are very rigid or fixed on a way they've tried, which might have been unsuccessful, and therefore there is no way. Now, like when we think about learned self-helplessness, there's actually an indication here that if someone is in a state of learned self-helplessness, they have they're stuck in a place where they don't believe that they can actually have any positive impact on the goal they're looking to achieve. So within the health fitness context, it could be body composition change, it could be getting stronger, it could be becoming more healthy, it could be lowering down those health parameters, indicators such as, resting heart rate or blood cholesterol levels, all these kind of things. Now, if people are in this position where they don't feel that they can actually move out of there, they are stuck. So what can be a facilitator of this is this whole level of perceived stress from a neurobiological perspective. It creates the idea of this fight, flight, freeze. Yeah, amygdala is obviously in play with that. We won't go into the depths of neurobiology and the brain in this sense right now, but maybe on another time. This obviously has release of cortisol, etc., different kind of chemical, and then you feel that there's this restriction on the prefrontal cortex, which is where a lot of rationalization, logical thinking, and in essence, the pathway out of being stuck is closed down. So you find the rigidity and habit loops of familiarity, which are essentially normally automatic. So someone is stuck in this position within their brain. It's how do you get out of that? For those that have been on the call before, you will have seen this graph in various different guises, but essentially what we're looking at here is regulating yourself before you have the option of becoming unstuck. So when we think about the sympathetic system, when that's in play, we have a lot of restriction, binary thinking, leaning into negative narratives that are already at play, and then seeking this kind of like familiarity or comfort rather than pushing into a place of um, discomfort and growth, so to speak. Then you see the parasympathetic flow. Here, there's a lot more like that psychological safety where you can actually have an open perspective and think wider and more across the whole landscape of your options. Risk tolerance is higher, and curiosity and the inhibition of habitual responses is in play. So you're able to break and try new things, new habits, new ways. So the idea of actually regulating before you even have a conversation around creativity is pretty frigging important, because you're just going to be banging your head against the wall. If someone is dysregulated, if someone can't anchor themselves, breathe correctly, and have a a acceptable level of arousal, the conversation just isn't going to work with regards to being creative. There is various different research across sporting, mainly across sporting, that I'm deeply familiar with. The individual zone of optimum functioning, which is where you find this peak of where people can really bring together what's required in order to be able to perform. Leading up to it, sometimes you have more of a lackadaisical approach, but then past it, things start to fall apart. And so there is this optimal position which you can find yourself, or your clients can find themselves in, where they are really going to bring everything together nicely. They need a bit of pressure, a bit of arousal, but then that creates the thinking, but too much and it collapses it down. So this is something that I quite like the idea of this, right? So when we have different areas that will allow for breakthroughs to be made. So the neurobiology of the aha moment, like the epiphany, the penny dropping, the moment where someone sees the path forward and they're like, okay, yeah, I actually think that this is going to be the right course of action. And it can be physical, it can be, very decision making based, it can be within health and fitness, a sense of pulling together an experiment that they truly believe will work. And it could be to do with having like a dynamic approach and a flexible approach to nutrition, and having a plan and having a pathway for that. Or in training wise, it could be a certain type of training, or their way in which they can adapt their training in order to be able to fit their own personal preferences and needs. So these three areas, which, how do you think of a great idea? Now, often great ideas come in funny places, not always necessarily like in the heat of the moment, but more during this opportunity of mind wandering, where I come up with ideas when I'm cycling on my bike, because I'm just kind of like, I know the route, I'm just cycling away, and I'm like, oh, that's an interesting thought. The shower, for example, or even just like taking time when you're relaxing and you're more distant from the hubbub of life and work. So that's the bottom left hand uh, circle, this kind of like generation area. So if we've got this that's continuously turning around, you're dipping into these areas where you have the opportunity for your mind to wander and for you to think of different things. And then the top one, you've got this um like almost filtration system to a degree, where you obviously can't go with every single idea you've got, but what you can do is almost task prioritize the ideas, or you can rank the ideas, or you can have a sense of preference over which one you'd like to try first, because it's just what you think you'll enjoy. And then the third circle, which should always be in rotation, is this kind of idea of evaluation. So what is this actually worth going ahead with this idea? Is it, does it hold enough creative and objective towards reaching the goal. So bringing this into a health and fitness context, if you've got all three hands stirring, you don't have three hands, obviously, we've only got two hands, but if you have all three circles stirring at the same time, where someone, a client has an opportunity to switch off and think of some new ideas, they then can come and have their ideas and whatever things that have come to them ranked or tested, and then in the third circle, you've got this like continuation of, okay, well, let's evaluate what we've done here. What's the possibility? How we can execute this idea? So it has to be all of these things: idea generation, like the ranking of the idea, the testing of the idea, and having it in a cyclical way, and having it all kind of happening at the same time will allow the client to feel that they are moving towards and being creative in their own health fitness journeys, and also will ensure with those aha moments come through, those moments of epiphany. And it's no different in normal coaching, not normal. It's no different in larger coaching where I've had conversations along the way where all these three things are happening, at the same time. And as long as they're being attended to in the right way, it really does produce uh, some moments of epiphany in all sorts of different areas of life. Now, this was a fantastic, like it was a paper, and then they compiled a massive report from it, which is all about building psychological capital. This is actually within leadership, but it's something that we can definitely bring into the idea of coaching and allowing there to be a sense of this. This is a facilitator of creativity and also innovative leadership. But what we know about this is that these four areas are almost key in having someone have enough psychological capital to allow for creativity to exist. So hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism all work in conjunction with one another in order to be able to elicit the outcome you're looking from creativity and innovative leadership. So hope, where we have the idea of wanting to and believing that the way forward towards our goal is the correct one, whatever that goal might be, it doesn't really matter. We have to hope that we are moving in the right direction. That is what our trajectory is set on. And the efficacy is the idea of knowing that challenges are going to come forward, but we are going to have and be as well prepared as we can to take on those challenges and at least have some sort of lesson to be learned from them. The resilience, bouncing back from adversity, that's one type of resilience. Restored resilience would be where we learn and we move forward from building a toolkit that's appropriate for whatever situation we're in and using the right tool. And then optimism, and it's not about having uh, false optimism, as in not linked in with the reality of life, but actually having a positive assessment of the future and what could happen and how these things can materialize. So hope along the line of the goal and the trajectory, efficacy that we can take on what comes along, resilience that we can bounce back if things get a bit tricky, and optimism of the positive outcome long term in the future. Now, if we can foster those within our clients as coaches, that's when creativity and innovation starts to become more achievable and more apparent. Now, in order for those to exist, the paper and the review looked at the idea of regulation and in a sense the focus on breathing. Now, self-regulation techniques balance out the nervous systems accordingly. They have shown to lower cortisol, heart rate variability, i.e., if there's a stressful situation, you recover quickly and your heart rate has a solid return back to resting. And these are all things that, if the person is capable of doing these, they facilitate the hero traits, and then the hero traits facilitates creativity and an open mind in order to be able to see what and how things can be tackled. Now, this, I'm sure, is what we've had experience in when we think about goals is very much around not focusing on the outcome when it's like pass or fail or I did not achieve that. It's more to do with what did I learn from that. So this is a very interesting sense because from a mastery perspective, if someone sees something as continuously learning and engaging in tasks for their own intrinsic satisfaction, then actually what we can do is look at just getting on with trying and this particular method, this particular approach, this um, set of actions, does it work? Yes, no, rank it, try something else that could be appropriate to see if it moves the needle and sees if we get some sort of progression. So the idea of it's not about coerce, it's definitely not about coercing, but it is about encouragement towards the mastery aspect in order to be able to create the right kind of environment for facilitation of creativity and creative thinking. So mastery is really important from that goal setting perspective. The neurological aspect is it almost encourages a certain amount of risk taking, whereby it doesn't impede that person's well-being if the risk is taken and the outcome isn't what they necessarily expected. This part of this part here is just a little bit of an indication as to how we might see this across two different sections. So when we're working with clients, a lot of what is essential in the initial phases is to be able to firstly really open up the books and open up the landscape and discover as much as we can and have some sort of definition brought in and consolidated. It's known as divergent exploration. So, where are the barriers? What's the actual problem? What are the actual issues here? The real issues. Um, what we don't want to do is assume. And that actually happens a lot in L&D. So in learning and development, someone will go in, they'll get a brief from the company that they've gone into, and even to a certain degree, I've gone in and had coaching sessions, delivered them, and someone said what they want to get out of that. But then it's my job to almost open up the books and go, okay, well, let's have a little bit of a flick through and see what else there might be. So really discover and define. Now, from this, the magic of creativity starts to look at, well, um, where do we actually need to apply the framework or the idea or the potential solution in order to be able to get the right kind of output. And that's where we converge. We start to look at, well, let's take this particular method of nutrition. Let's take this particular way of training. Okay, let's have a look at this week setup. Is this week setup going to work for you as an individual? And obviously, when we have the idea of development, you have to test it and then you have to go yes or no. So it's not about the definitive answer being found from this particular process: discover, define, develop, deliver. It's more of a continuation. So once it's delivered, you then go, okay, well, where was this? How did this land? And I think when we have clients that are looking for a very set approach, they're almost undermining their own levels of creativity. So I almost would push back on a client and go, well, why don't you and I spend a bit of time discovering rather than you coming to me asking for a set plan to execute and deliver, which is not really taking into consideration everything before. So it's involving them in the creativity of that in order to be able to have a certain level of accuracy when you do deliver it. Otherwise, you could just be delivering something which is completely off what actually is required. And that happens a lot in failed coaching practices or failed L&D, where they go in, they deliver what they've been asked to deliver, but that's not actually what's needed, because the whole creativity and collaboration process is completely skipped. So that's worthwhile just thinking about the discovery and true definition through divergent exploration, and then converging back on the true development and the delivery and stress testing. I don't know if anyone's had the Disney method, which it's been around for quite some time now, but recently I was coaching someone uh, in one of the big four, and they had well, we had a decent chat about this and how they were going to approach this with their team. So having the idea that it, and if you do group coaching and you're looking to be creative as a group, this would be quite relevant. But even if you are like one on one with a client, actually taking them through this and saying, okay, well, look, you can wear three hats here, but you can't wear them at the same time. You have to put one hat on and then through taking one off, and then you can switch them over, but you can't wear any at the same time. And that's the rule that you have when you go into approaching this kind of method. So the dreamer, where you almost remove any kind of barriers. So literally, as it says, dream away. So the ultimate vision for your health, fitness, the goal you want to achieve, if nothing stood in your way. The realist, the action planning and feasibility. So how do we bridge the gap between where the dream is and where you actually are today, and that's where you can kind of break down the steps of what's required. And the critic where you would be almost pushing back on that, so saying, well, what happens if this happens? What happens if you find yourself stuck, in a service station? Or what happens if you find yourself where everything's become really limited to you? Or what happens if you can't find the gym or the equipment that you want? So kind of like stress testing and pushing back and saying, well, what would you do now? Where would we be? And I've had a couple of incidences over the years working with teams and working with a couple of head of a team, and I encouraged her to go into her work and almost set out, like, for the first, I think it was I think she delivered a 2 hour workshop, and I was like, okay, so for the first part of this workshop, we only dream, and then we've got a time limit, and then when we get to the end of that time limit, we put away the dreamer hat, we bring out the realist, and we start to talk about in a realistic manner what kind of things do we really need to do. And then once we've come up with what the realistic plan is to move forward, we then criticize it and we stress test it, and we can really go to town on it, like really go to town on it. So that whole creative process, first, second, and third part, creates a very distinctive objective at each point, which allows for there to be clarity over whatever decision is made, whatever solution is reached, or at least whatever solution has been decided to be implemented and tested and tried. We think about tool sets that we've got to shift perspective. And to be honest with you, shifting perspective is probably one of the most important aspects of coaching in what we need to be able to do on a day-to-day basis. So there's a lot of fixed thinking which happens, a lot of binary thinking. So by asking questions to shift perspective initially is something that gets the ball rolling for creativity. So what would this routine look like if it felt easier? Uh, what advice would you give someone else in this exact position is a fantastic question to ask. So just bringing in these kind of questions, removing constraints. So, someone brings up a certain idea of uh, they're worried, they're fearful, they're anxious, they're whatever the kind of emotional constraint is, if you were to propose removing that completely, what would that create? There's a lot of barriers that come up when we think about training time, money. Um, if you've got families, these can sometimes be quite difficult to work around. So, having the idea of removing that to break that habitual uh, formed reasoning can sometimes then move along the continuum. And then if there is, and this is something that has a very uh, perceptual job of a coach, is if someone's talking about something and how they want to change, be innovative, they've created a solution that they want to go and run and see if it works, but there is these physical tells of holding tension or not necessarily having a confident tone in their language around how they're going to go and apply it, then this is how, questioning that and saying, okay, well, your energy isn't necessarily telling me that this is something you truly believe in that we've spoken about. So almost challenging it in a very um, sensitive and conscious way. Having an idea around your own rigidity as a coach. So some of these things over the years I have definitely lent into. So relying on frameworks when you feel uncertain, and are you able to tolerate silence, ambiguity, experimentation? Sometimes saying to a client, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out together, is the best thing you can say, because you're opening the door to, like, we are going to create the right thing for you. It's going to be a bit messy. It might not be particularly linear, but with your position and your understanding and my experience, together we can have a collaborative, creative flurry, and we will get there. Um, and again, it's like, do you create that space for exploration, or do you have a predetermined pathway that someone comes to you and says, I want to lose fat, and you go, well, this is what we're going to do? Or are you more open to the idea of saying what I just said there, that kind of creative collaboration? So, we have to remember that our job as a coach, one of the definitions, there's many definitions of what coaching is, but one of the definitions of coaching is where we are creating synchronous conversation that is geared around, being present, holding a space, and allowing for learning and collaborative conversations to happen around creating these penny drop moments. That really is what coaching is. It's about two people and one person taking a role of asking questions and creating this environment whereby synchronous inspiration and language can occur, which creates these moments. So just to give, and I do like to give a little bit of a kind of pathway, so to speak, around how, the idea of creating that creative environment, around facilitating that creative environment, can have a profound effect. But where we know we have to secure someone is in emotional safety, first and foremost, psychological safety, emotional safety, or a place where they can feel relaxed and have the ability to regulate their nervous system, where they are able to allow their brain to have the capability of moving into the various different parts in order for it to be effective. The idea of divergent ideation. So, okay, let's take it all away and let's talk about the whole landscape of possibility. Where are we? What have we got? We can do anything. We can create anything. And then converging it down onto and testing the solution that's been brought into play, that's been collaboratively created with you and the client as a coach. I think that I mentioned this earlier, like the brain health and fitness, it rarely comes from having more information. It's just about having and using the information in the right way with the right perspective and creating that opportunity whereby different perspectives can be switched between in order for there to be the solution reached. So just to circle back, where has creativity been important for you? How can it be affected positively or negatively? And where have you seen the impact of someone having low creativity? And how do we protect the freedom of creativity in coaching for us and our clients? So you might take a screenshot of that, up to you.